Hello, my name is Margaret Adele, and welcome to another indie book review. I should have reviewed this one so much earlier. I finished it just before going on a weekend trip, and then forgot to film it right away when I get back, so it's been a hot minute. But anyways, today we are finally reviewing Church of Thieves by I.Q. Malcolm. This is a kind of fantasy. It's definitely set in a high fantasy-esque world, but there's not a lot of direct magic. You are led to believe that like the gods are real here, question mark. But beyond that, it's kind of like a high fantasy. I think it's supposed to be like Renaissance Italy was the vibes I was getting. And it is all about the titular Church of Thieves. There is a god who is the god of the misfortunate, and people think that that means that the church acolytes are helping the poor and needy, and they technically are, but they're doing this by Robin Hooding it up and stealing from the rich. Essentially, causing misfortune to help the misfortunate. I loved that concept a lot. And our two point of view characters are Talus, who has been raised in the church after a near execution at the age of 8, and a newer character called Naria, who is an immigrant, and I believe is meant to be from like Africa or in a high fantasy Africa, because it talks about like savannas and stuff. And she is brand new, has only joined the church because her mother is terminally ill, and she wants to get essentially hospice care for her mom. And so in return joins up to the church, but she doesn't know exactly what she stepped into. She just is a great inventor and wants a chance to use her inventions. However, things take a really wrong turn when the mother of their finger is murdered. The church is split up into 5 groups, each called a finger, and each group has a leader that makes up the council of the church. I think there's also supposed to be like other people running around too. Like I definitely got the gist in the story that there's more than 25 people in this church. Maybe the other people are just like doing the upkeep stuff. I'm not sure. But Mother Sienna is murdered, and she was murdered to cover up something. So now our lovely troupe is having to figure out what it was and catch her murderer, as well as stop this grandiose plot that threatens their entire kingdom. I really liked that idea. I also love a found family. Most of the characters in this already know each other, but Neria is the new one and is, I don't want to say assimilated, welcomed in pretty quickly. And in general, I did like the book. There was something. Like, some hidden code that wasn't cracked for me, and it might have been the characters feeling just slightly too flat, just slightly more two-dimensional. For example, Naria is very clearly meant to be some kind of African immigrant, and she keeps talking about everything in metaphors of like lions at the watering hole. Like, it kind of reminded me of Mean Girls when Katie kept talking about animal, but like Neria's been in this country for 4 years. It just, I don't know. There was something about it that was like, okay, we get it. She's an immigrant from an African-inspired nation. Can we move on? Or there was Omar, who really focused on his womanizing a lot. It was all the characters were just not totally flat, but veered closer to being flat and three-dimensional. Every character, to a certain extent, gets some level of fleshed out, but it feels more like they are a stereotype, and then they get like 1 or 2 scenes where they're different, and then they go back to being the stereotype a little bit. So I think the character work needed a little bit more tweaking, just a little bit. I do like that we have queer characters. We have a trans character that comes out as trans in this book. So if that's your bag, I would highly suggest it. I am not a member of that community, but I have read a lot of books by trans authors and with trans characters, and as far as I could tell, it did well with respect towards that identity. I can't give you more than that. But regardless, there was a lot of fun moments in it. I loved all the talk about heists, and they have this secret, signing, essentially, hand signing language that they used for thieving and heists and stuff. And I loved, Talus getting to you essentially watch him manipulate someone, into giving a lot of money, and they're not a good person, so you don't feel bad that they're losing like 30,000 gold, and I don't know exactly how much that's meant to be in their world, but I get the gist that it's pretty much a big number. There's one confirmed romance that'll be moving forward, maybe two if I was reading those signs correctly, but not a lot of overt romance in this one specifically, other than some low-key pining. There is some pining. I probably should mention there's also some slight gore. Not a ton, but some. Slight torture. Just light torture. It's fine. Regardless, the story really revolves around the secret, the conspiracy that threatens the entire nation, and the idea of a country or an empire that wants to wipe out religion versus should the religion stay. Thankfully, it didn't feel too similar to any kind of like real world religion talk. This is a polytheistic world, and you do get the gist that like the gods aren't just walking around and chilling, but it is left ambiguous that like, yeah, there might actually be higher beings hanging out around here, but it's not overt. Like, technically, I guess this is a fantasy, but like, it's not, the magic's not in your face. The supernatural elements aren't in your face. It's a lot more of just the idea of a world where magic could theoretically exist. And it was really fun to kind of explore that a little bit. I did like that the world building was not like paragraphs of text where you have to read all about it. It pretty much just focused on what the characters needed to know to move the plot forward. So they would only really know like, okay, we know this one dude, the god of the thieving church. We know this other goddess, the river goddess, that's in charge of the healers because they're the ones that are taking care of Naria's mom, like that kind of stuff. You knew there were a ton of gods, but they just focused on the ones that were important for the story, and they just focused on the things that were important to the story without giving a ton of extraneous world building just for the sake of it. The ending does leave a lot of room open for them to go out and explore more of the world later, so I think we are going to see more of this land, and they do make vague allusions to other nations and other countries, and it really does feel like they're all just real world inserts. Like, you know, you get one that very clearly, again, feels like an African country, one that very clearly feels like Italy, one they talk about an accent, and the way they describe that accent really sounds like French, like that kind of thing. I don't think there's a one-to-one for every country in Earth, but it definitely at times felt like a kind of a high fantasy overlay, but I don't mind that. I think if you're going to introduce a ton of countries and political intrigue, having some level of recognizability, I guess you could call it, to help people understand is pretty useful. And in general, I am someone that tends to struggle a lot with high fantasy world building. It's probably one of the biggest reasons I don't do more high fantasy on my channel is I just cannot with the giant paragraphs of text and stuff. So it's really, really nice getting one that's really easy and flows really well. But the big thing we have to talk about, and I have to talk about it vaguely because spoilers, is the twist. There is a big twist that reconceptualizes everything, and I am one of two minds about it. One, it was set up well. In fact, one character is like, oh my gosh, how did I not see this? And is thinking back through, and you're like, oh no, there were clues. There were clues to the reveal. I'm glad we realized that. So I like that it was set up so well that like you could theoretically, I did not, but you could theoretically go back and read through and see the clues as they happen. The thing is though, the reveal changes the game so drastically that like it makes certain tension points earlier completely moot. Like there was a timeline earlier, there was like a deadline of a time limit for something that's rendered moot by the twist. There was like a threat of, oh, do I have to do this thing? Do I have to make this sacrifice? Or that's rendered, like a lot of things that were points of tension, like the tension wasn't relieved, they were just rendered pointless. Like the tension never really got a payoff. It just wasn't a thing to be worried about anymore after the twist. That was a little bit annoying because I really liked the points of tension that were brought up earlier in the book, and I wish we'd gotten more. I wish we'd had a little bit more focus on the deadline, on the debts, on the big one is Talus. He has this whole thing where he's willing to make a great sacrifice, but like again, it's just that kind of, it was a good twist in theory. It just, I wish those points of tension had gotten altered or were still somehow important post reveal. And also, while I liked the reveal, villain monologue. Villain monologues are weird at the best of times because you kind of have to make a person stupid to make them work, to make someone blatantly say, here's what I have done and why I have done all these things and what I am going to do next. Like, that's kind of inherently a stupid thing for a person to do. And this one has two. This one has two evil villain monologues. And I'm like, you didn't need the first one. Actually, the second one, again, vague, because spoilers, the second one had a purpose. Like, okay, it's still stupid, but I see why this person feels like they need to monologue to this other person. That one makes sense. The first one did not. And since there are two, why are we repeating the info? Like, we don't need it. We already got it. So that was a little bit clunky. It is so hard to make a villain monologue anything but cartoonish, just because the very idea of an antagonist just hanging around being like, oh, let me tell you about my plan, without them seeming like an idiot, you know? So that was a little frustrating. But beyond that and the tension, the twist was pretty cool. And overall, I gave this book 4 stars. Like I said, there were a lot of cool ideas. I like the world building. I like the character group dynamic. I like the friendship. I like how the trans character is treated. There was just something missing in the characters, some little piece needed to fully unlock them for me. And I wish the twist had been the same. I liked the concept, but I wish in execution it had been done a little differently. But beyond that, a great pick if you like, rapscallion rogues doing morally gray things, or I guess, morally gray, because they're really only screwing over evil nobility for the sake of the poor. So, like, in today's modern society, I don't even know if you could call that morally gray, but they are a lovable bunch of queer weirdos that I love, and I would suggest you check this one out as well. And with nothing else to say, I hope you have a wonderful day and a marvelous tomorrow.